Welcome to Idiot Proof, the podcast dedicated to digital ID. Your hosts are the lovely Sally McKenzie and myself, Rob Hotchin.
We hope you enjoy listening and maybe even learn a thing or two. I know I will.
Hi, Sally.
Hi, Rob.
So, who do we have on today's podcast?
Well, today we're joined by Kersti Eesmaa. Kersti is the former Estonian Ambassador in Australia and one of Australia's sought after experts and consultants in cybersecurity and digital identity. And Kersti's also an ambassador for women in cybersecurity. So we're very lucky to have her along with us today.
Hi, Kersti.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Sydney.
Thank you. Enjoying it as always.
Thank you for making the time. And I think that this conversation is such an important one. In our last conversation, the last episode, we were talking with John Shepherd about digital ID coming to Australia and being able to talk to someone who has been representing Estonia in Australia from a country who've had digital ID for a while, and we'll get into that. Just gives Australians a bit of perspective around we're not the first ones doing this. It's a well-trodden path, and other countries have been doing it for a long time, and it's been very successful. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. And indeed, when I first arrived to Australia and I went to everybody and started to talk about the wonderful digital life we have in Estonia, I was almost shocked that people were like, no, this is not for us.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised that something that we have been enjoying for 20 plus years, there's a bit of resistance in Australia. Mm-hmm. And I've learned like how I need to almost learn to drive on a different side of the road. I also need to learn how to talk to Australians on digital identity.
Being a Brit and coming to Australia, there are some aspects where I've had to do very different, but I've had to kind of re-educate or re-change the way I position things. And now when I go back home to the UK, I feel like I'm so far off elements because I've had to adapt myself to. Do you find that when you go home and you go, oh, I forgot I could do this? And
there is a bit of that, but I think mostly every culture is different, every country is different. So I think when we talk about digital identity, you can't just take one solution and kind of put it to another country. And going back to your intro, I think what Australia can do is really look around in the world, and Australia is definitely doing that already, and see what other countries are doing and what suits Australia. Yeah. So you can't take like, oh, there's a country X that's doing that, let's just copy that. So, and when I go back to Estonia and do my digital lifestyle there, then I'm sometimes like, oh, it's so good, it's so easy. And interestingly enough, now that I've left my diplomatic life, and I'm sort of joined Australian normal life, or being a normal resident, and being engaged with all those services like MyGov and linking all those services, I can actually see so much better how different it is. I'm still going to be diplomatic, and I'm not going to say if it's better or worse, but it's definitely different what I'm used to, yeah.
So can I ask you just on that? I mean, Estonia is often cited as a world leader in digital identity. So what is it about the Estonian digital ID system that makes it so unique?
I think one thing that people often tend to forget, we've been doing it for a long time. And Rob, you said that in the beginning, we've had digital identity for more than 20 years. And, you know, if I try to think back, how did I feel when we first started? Because that has been most of my adult life, because I'm still young. But it's kind of, it wasn't something that was introduced to us and we were like, yes, it sounds wonderful, we're going to do it. It's something that happens gradually and over time. So I think Australia has been doing it for a couple of years or maybe a little bit longer. So it's natural that when you start, it takes time. The second thing why I guess we've been successful, we really started with foundations. So we got the foundations correct, which we actually started with digital identity, because we realized that's the bit that you need to get right. And Australia is now in the road of getting it right, I guess. And the second thing we realized pretty early on that in order to work, I guess, cheaply and effectively, we need to create interoperability. That's a difficult word.
That one. I really do.
But that was the other bit that we really got right. And also when you go back in the history, I mean, we regained our independence from Soviet Union in 1991. So our country is now basically 33 years old. And I guess the feeling that people had was very, when you have a new country, then you can, let's build it, let's do it great. You don't have a legacy. Everybody's excited about that.
Yeah.
It's greenfield, exactly. So it's in that mood, it's much easier to introduce new ideas and new things. And I mean, it also helped that we had very little money, which means when you have very little money, you really have to come with smart solutions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you talk about when you go back to Estonia and doing your digital life there and how seamless it is. You know, what do you think some of the big benefits that digital ID can bring to everyday life for people, you know, both individuals and also for business?
It's such a big part of our lives, so I always call it the lifestyle. So it really incorporates all my interactions with government. We don't have state governments, but we have local government. So both,
That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
I know. So government, but also local government. But more importantly, I use it a lot also in dealing with sort of private services I need, whether it be electricity or telco or, you know, even checking my kid's result, what he's doing at school. So everything is interconnected. So it's almost, when you ask me that question, it's almost difficult to answer because that is the life I'm used to. I guess one of the benefits being so far away from home is that I can actually do many things online. Like I recently wanted to amend something on my will. And I thought, okay, when do I travel to Estonia? I need to book a time, la, 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 la. And then I realized I can actually not do it myself. I still need a lawyer to help me. But I can identify with digital identity and get that done, even though I'm in Australia. So life is just easy, and more, they're seamless services, which I don't almost realize who is offering the service, but I can just use it with my digital ID.
And so the challenge we have, the first part is, you talked about, it's different in every country. So we can't do a cookie cutter, whatever works somewhere else will work in Australia. But at the same time, I think so often we get caught up going, we're unique or we're different. So we try and create a brand new solution. And it's finding that balance between the two. And then you've got the challenge of technology adoption and culture adoption, where people have been doing it the manual way, the non-digital way for 30, 40 years, where you knew in Estonia that pretty much everything was new. So no one really had an embedded way of how we do X or Y.
Correct.
Therefore, they adopted the new much easier. I don't know why I'm going to ask you this, but how do we do that in Australia? Because like, if I've been doing something the same way for 30, 40 years now, and I can see the reservations of digital identity here. Now I'm being told I've got to do it differently, and I might not be digitally adapt to be able to go and do that. It's a challenge.
Well,
right?
What you just said, there's so much there. But I think it starts, you know, how do you build a digital society, you know, guide for dummies or whatever you call it. So when you look around in the world, it's not so much how do you do it, because that's up to every single country to decide. But when you look around and you analyze the successful countries, there are certain bits that are similar. Let's start with digital identity. In some way, shape, or form, you need to have digital identity. In our case, it's government issued. Technically speaking, it's compulsory, technically speaking, but there's a little bit of story behind that. But Australia can definitely choose a road to have multiple digital identities, or that, you know, private providers can offer digital identity. But you need to have a digital identity, because without that, I don't know of any successful digital society in the world who's been sort of doing it without that step.
Yeah.
So in that sense, what Australia is doing now with the digital identity, it's different from our, but it still provide that identity. There's a customer choice whether they will use MyGov, or at some point they can use private providers, but that's the bit that you need. So that's sort of sorted, I think, for Australia. Step one. And in few years, we can see those private providers coming in and kind of creating that choice for the customers, if you like. The second element that is absolutely necessary, and again, I don't know of any successful digital society without interoperability. I think I managed this time the word. But if you need to create that infrastructure where either private services or government agencies or state governments can sort of plug in, because I sometimes, when I talk about it, can you imagine when, let's say, we live in the same house and I want to build a kitchen and you want to build a, bathroom. And we both need access to water and electricity. And even though it's the same house, I have to figure out how do I get water and electricity in the kitchen. And you have to figure out how you get that in the bathroom. And at the same time, we don't talk to each other. I think it makes sense that, if it's the same house, we come together and we say, we need, the plumbing, we need electricity. Let's figure that one out. And I think that's the challenge for Australia, because as far as I know, that's the bit that is a bit missing, or at least it's not out there.
The connective tissue of it all.
Yeah. There's a lot of people building bathrooms and kitchens. And when we talk about government agency or federal or states, even more so. So everybody thinks their kitchen is the best and it's connected to the electricity the best way. While I think the way it works better is definitely, let's sit down, let's build that plumbing and electricity. And then, as I said, easy way to connect to it.
And I think there's such an important part of that, which is the focus shouldn't be on a great bathroom or kitchen. The focus should be on whoever's living in the house to have a great experience in either or both.
Exactly.
And I think we're somewhat missing that. And I've got like a frustration with Australia because we're only 28 million people, give or take. We're not a huge country, that we have such an opportunity. We've got such a great tech kind of foundation here. There's some amazing companies who have gone on and done amazing things. And where we don't want to go down the path of like an EU path where everything's so hyper regulated that no one can break out of technology in Europe anymore. That's just non-existent. But so Australia's got this great opportunity to be this kind of tech hub of kind of, we're small, we can punch above our weight. Australia's been doing that in their entire existence. Like, create this foundation and build something great. We trip up over ourselves with our different federated states, and we kind of argue between this is what it should look like. And even states are building their own digital identity solutions. And it's like, if we could just get the foundation in place, like, we could genuinely move the Australian economy so much further forward. I think we're missing that bit.
You have so much more to win than a country without states. Because, obviously there's, government. Let's say in Australia's case, it's federal government where you need certain services. Every now and then. We actually don't use federal services that often, if you think about it. Where you can really have a win when you could somehow incorporate the state services. And what I think sometimes would be helpful is really to concentrate on bits and bobs, like start with little things. In that sense, I really like the trust exchange idea of starting with pilots, but you can really make a big difference with small things. We saw what New South Wales did with digital license. The uptake was really excellent. But even something as small, I recently changed my address from ACT to New South Wales and changed my driving license and all of that. And just to give you an example, my son, who is still on Ps, we went to the services, center, and they needed to check when his P license was issued, because for Ps it's kind of important. Yeah. So the only way to do it was to send an email to another territory then. And that sort of, for us, it gave us 20 minutes extra time to wait, which is, I guess, fine. You can wait when you change. But at the same time, can you imagine the time that was actually used on both services center to actually look at that? Say, hello, can you check? Somebody at the other end had to kind of look into that email. And that would be so easy to fix with a computer. Just a very simple, like, give me the issuance date. And if states could come together with something as simple as that, and maybe some states have, I just don't know. That was my personal experience. Can you imagine how much time you could save on that service center? And I think we need those kind of small use cases where people can see, oh, this is useful, like with statute declaration. You can do it easy. Driving license is a good example, and et cetera, et cetera. And those sometimes I think it's easier to do little bits, and that's why we have been successful as well.
I got stuck in Queensland the other day because I couldn't check into a hotel because I didn't have ID, because I used my New South Wales digital license everywhere now. And then I couldn't check into the hotel because I didn't have any physical ID.
Yeah.
It's like, but it's in New South Wales. It's
That's
still an
crazy.
Australian license.
Oh,
But you
God.
have that's what I'm saying. I mean, with the States, there's so much more to win. And with the digital identity, digital ID bill, I think it's going to be phase, 3 or whatever it's called, when states should become part of that infrastructure. And then at some point, private service as well, a private provider. So that's going to be the holy
And I
dream.
think that this is where my grievance is the wrong word, but where I think there was an opportunity to be better with the whole digital ID pieces. It's hard. I get that it's hard for government, be that federal, state, local, to be able to connect the dots between them all and come to a common decision of what's best for everyone, where a private company doesn't have to think like that. A private company go, right, here's the central pin. We'll plug into all your different states and regional pieces in the federal, and we'll make sure we tick every box, and we'll make a single user experience for the user so they benefit from it. And only really in the way that Australia is built that private can do that. So having private delayed in this motion until later on, I just think that it makes it a little bit harder to get the right solution in place.
Well, let's look at the glass half full and half empty. It was longer in the beginning.
Yeah.
So it's actually not delayed, it's brought forward.
Correct. Yeah.
That's the ex-government in me talking, but I guess, states, going back to my bathroom and kitchen, everybody thinks that their plumbing and electricity is the best. And they're so convinced of that. And I think all the state governments plus both territories, they have their own digital identity. So there's a bit of a competition there. I would also think on the private, there's competition as well. I mean, obviously every private provider who is kind of thinking of doing that, they think theirs is the best. But in that sense, competition is good.
100%.
I mean,
And that's why it should be consumer choice, right? As long as all of the private providers adhere to whatever security postures, whatever, et cetera, ISOs are put in place, then great, they get the stamp of approval and the consumer
accredited providers.
And I think
all
that
of that.
if I look at digital ID in an ideal world in 10 years' time, then you've probably got 3 or 4 or 5 different digital ID providers on your phone, which all have interoperability. And I always use the example of buying a motorbike from someone in the sense of, I'm going to buy a motorbike from you and I want to go and test drive it. You're on my ID and I'm on Privy. We can share details. So, if I run off with your motorbike when I'm test driving it, that you can go to the police station and go, Rob stole my bike.
You're not going to do that, right?
No, I'm a terrible motorbike driver. So, but I think, I just think we can be better. What I really like, I don't know, I'm pretty sure you said this, whether it was on Rob and Victor's podcast or something you've written was around in Estonia, you can sign up for a gym membership with your digital ID. Is that right?
Because, we have private companies can kind of become part of that if they want to have a new customer. And if they want to make it easy, then they often offer that as do you want to sign on as a customer with your digital ID? It's an option. You can still do it with email or whatever you choose to. But so many people choose to do that because it kind of, it's one less password to remember, and we all hate passwords, especially if we forget them and we have to kind of restart from the beginning. You have rewards card of the card. Yeah. Sometimes I can just do that with my ID card. So it's just making life easier.
I love those examples because I think when people think about it, they go, okay, my ID, I can get into the ATO easily with that. But in my view of digital ID is it interacts with everything physically and digitally we'll do in the future, right? From walking into a bar and proving you're over 18 and sharing only that I'm over 18, you don't need my date of birth, through to signing up for a gym membership and so on. I just think that those use cases are
that's why the trust exchange is so exciting, because as far as I understand it, that's exactly where it's heading. Like if you want to become maybe not the gym right away, but let's say a bank or telco or something like that. And if they are part of that pilot or later part of that, then you can actually sign up with your in the beginning with MyGov, but later with also the private providers of digital identity.
And the loyalty card ones is like one that gets, I've got, I can't remember what group it is. One of the hotel groups, I've got 3 different loyalty programs because I've used 3 different email addresses. And if you collected them all together, I'd probably be a status that mattered and I might get an upgrade in the room. But I don't, because each time they go, are you a member of my email address?
Exactly.
And they go, no, you're not. And I sign up again and again. But if it's digital ID,
but I guess,
so much easier.
I mean, going back to a question why Estonia was successful, I think one of the reasons was that we actually came up with the service that people needed often, and that was getting to your bank.
Yeah.
So when we had digital ID introduced, and banks were thinking, let's save some money with all the password managements. And our banks back in the sort of 2000s, they said that we want to go with that as a primary way to identify our customers when they go to our internet banking, for example. So, and banks spend a lot of money and efforts in educating people and kind of giving them, at the time we had only smart card readers, so you needed an actual physical reader. So they gave out those readers for free. They showed how it's done. So I've always thought, like, what's the magic in Australia? I mean, how do you actually raise the trust and make people comfortable with using digital ID? I think when it's only limited to government services, then it's not going to be really popular.
I agree, because I mean, how many times do you interact with the ATO, really, or
Once a year,
you know, not very many. For most people, I would suggest they don't interact with government services all that often. So yeah, it's going to be those use cases that are much more frequent. You know, like even going to the dentist. Every time I go to the dentist, they give me this long form that I've got to fill in, you know, name, email address.
What dentist are you going to?
Just a regular chain dentist.
What do you have to fill out a form?
Yeah, every time. You know, if I go to the spa, again, the same form and the same information. I have to spend, you know, 5-10 minutes filling in stuff that would just be so much easier. But you're right, it's those kinds of interactions that are much more frequent, where you actually can prove over and over again.
I think the key part to success on this is how do you fast forward to the second use? So that's why banking is so key, right? Because typically in a 12-month period, everyone at some point will access their bank. And especially in Australia, maybe I'm wrong, I don't want to talk out of line, but I think Australian banking is really good. Coming from the UK, where it was so bad, and the UK is maybe better now. I've been out there for a long time, but I remember coming to ours and like the CommBank app, and I'm like, this is brilliant. So much easier to use. And there is a bit of trust in, if it's being used by the banks, it should be secure.
Exactly.
So I think that's a really key piece to get people to go through that. And then they go through that first interaction, creating their digital ID for the banking. And then the next time they're going to use it, let's say for the gym, they go, oh, I can use this now. And it's one click and it's dead easy. But if that was the first interaction with the gym, they'd be like a bit more skeptical about what's this new thing. So I think that the banking is really key to build trust and get people to use that first use.
For us, it was
and then from there, it's downhill on all the second use.
And I think then consumers' expectations get raised, right? So if they're like, oh, if I can use my digital identity to interact with the bank, why can't I use it at
it's
the
Apple
dentist?
Pay.
Or, you know.
Exactly. So if I hate it, my worst thing is, this morning I actually had breakfast, and you know you pay on your table thing and you order on your phone.
QR code.
And they didn't have
Apple Pay.
And I needed a physical card. I'm like, now I can't order it. And like they didn't know what to do if I didn't have I'm like, why doesn't everyone have Apple Pay? So annoying, and it makes life so much easier. I often don't buy things because it doesn't have Apple Pay. But that's what digital ID will be. I go to sign up for something, it doesn't have digital ID. I'm like, I haven't got my ID on me. I'm not signing this.
As I was saying, I mean, for us it was banks. And I mean, the first government service, like many other countries, was taxes. I mean, everybody hates doing them. Everybody has to do them. In Estonia, we don't really have tax agents like it's quite common in Australia. But it just made the tax, the process so much easier. And I was even told that the way it happened, the first digital service in Estonia, was that there was a lady who was doing taxes, like, in the office, like service center or whatever, tax office. And there was a long queue of people who were waiting with their papers to submit their tax declaration. And at some point, the lady realized, like, oh, this is, the queue is too long. And she just turned her computer like the other way to the customer and said, fill it in yourself to save time. And that's how I was told that's how Digital Tax Office was born.
Wow.
Because then they realized, like a light bulb,
Self-service,
customers can do it.
Yeah.
And then it's actually easy I don't know if the story is 100%
It's a great story,
true,
though.
but it's a great story, even if it's not true.
So,
But it needs to be a service that people trust. I think in that case, banks, you trust your money. Or it can be, I don't know, superannuation or what else Australian trust. And driving license is a good use case. But at the same time, if you do your digital driving license, you do it once.
Yeah.
It's not a service you do over and over again.
That's right.
So I think, and sometimes there's this feeling in Australia, I feel that, we're going to just one day have this wonderful digital society. And it's not going to be like that. I think most of us, even those Australians who are very strictly against any digital ID, I can bet you my money on it that they have actually a digital identity on their phone.
Yeah.
They have either a Google account or they have something else. Or even Facebook is a sort of like digital identity. So in that sense,
they've all been built by a Trojan horse, it feels like.
Yeah.
People are kind of, I'll create a Google account and do this, and before I know it.
But then they get the benefit. I mean, you're willing to use digital ID when you get the benefit, which is the email, or you can see from Facebook what your friends are doing, or, there's always this kind of, in that moment when the benefit is, or when life is better or easier, you're kind of, I'm okay giving away my data. But when it's the government, especially federal government, when it's like, no. So I think there's almost this cultural change that is not, I wouldn't say the word needed, but is happening.
Yeah.
And when people actually think about and have those positive experience, then when it will kind of tilt over.
Yeah, we're looking at a really interesting use case, which is putting digital identity on top of email. So if normal email communication is fine, you don't need any identity piece. But if I'm sending an email, which I need to know it was sent from or to or someone in a certain way, and how you can go back and you can change email threads and so on. Yeah. So you can select a button on your email that then basically locks down all previous emails and how it was written. And then you can see that actually this person has sent me this email and it's not been altered or doctored
like
since.
A blockchain in email.
Exactly, that's digital footprints, right?
Yeah.
To ensure that if it's of an important, like if it's someone proving something or whatever, then it's actually going to lock it down to go, this is actually it. And then that's another use case where you go, well, there's been so many scenarios of people going, I can't trust it on email, so therefore it has to be in person. If you can make people trust email, then it's another way of getting digital identity into as a positive use case that people can use.
And you mentioned sort of, Kersti, some of the privacy and security concerns that some people have around digital identity. How did Estonia I mean, I assume there would have been some people in Estonia when, this was being rolled out that had similar concerns. Like, how did Estonia overcome those concerns, and what do you think Australia could do to help build trust in a national digital identity system?
I think when it was first created, they actually had to make a decision whether it's compulsory or whether it's a choice. And in our case, they chose to do it compulsory. But interestingly enough, the compulsory bit was actually meant for the government, in the sense that when government designs a new service, because the law said it's compulsory, they always had to design also a digital service. So nobody is punished when they don't have ID card, or you can totally live your life without it. You don't get any fines or anything. It's just, so the compulsory bit is often misunderstood. It starts from
every service must have
a digital element in it. Yeah. So this bit was, and then obviously the privacy bit developed over the years. And what was massive for us was, of course, the GDPR or the EU regulation, because when that was implemented, whenever that happened in 2000, I don't remember the year, but sort of 15 or something like that. I might remember that wrong, but it was very difficult for us because I was working in a consular service, and we actually had to take all our consular databases because we have a lot of information on people, from our population registry, but also the cases. Somebody dies abroad, somebody is in a works as a prostitute. I mean, there's a lot of data which is very, very, very sensitive. So what we needed to do as an almost audit when we adopted GDPR was every single line in those databases, we needed to think, do I need that information? For how long should I keep it? Is it once only, or is it actually recorded somebody else? And that took us to data integrity, which is even digital data needs to have original copy. And that gives people the, GDPR is such a strong element of that privacy is respected. And I guess the same is for Australian Privacy Act, I think it's
Privacy
called.
Act, yeah.
So, and that gives people the confidence that their privacy is really following certain rules that are quite strict. The second element that we did was we have a data tracker, which means that every single person can see who has access their data. So you can always log on to your MyGov portal and you can see, I don't know, that the pharmacy accessed your prescription, for example. And if that doesn't make sense to you, then probably you had a
I love that log. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine, Baz, who is the interim CCO, Frankie One, who are a verification provider. But we were talking about, I'd love it to be able to just put my details into a site and it tells me who has access and when they've accessed it and when they've seen my data over the last however long. Because I think that, I don't think people are aware how often people's data are being used at the moment. And it's constantly being used. And I think if people could see that, I call it an identity sprawl. So whenever you've been giving your name, date of birth, address out over the years, that's still living and being used in people's databases, but you don't know it's happening.
It's terrifying when you think about it, actually.
Then you'd be like, right, now I understand why digital identity is important, because I can now, there's a log whenever anyone pings my data.
And we have a system that if that doesn't make sense to you, then you can always send inquiry, like, why was my data? And again, going back to my consular, we did get those inquiries. And then we said, oh, but your brother was doing something in Tokyo and that's why we accessed your data as, the next person or something. And people are, oh, okay.
Because we do that on credit cards, right? And you see
a suspicious transaction.
Yeah, you're like, what's that? It's normally my wife, but but like we do that there. It should be the exact same. Like, it's funny we have all this we're so worried about the financial element of it from a spend perspective coming out of my bank. Yet the impact could be so much worse from an identity point of view, but we just haven't recognised it.
But that's going back to the bathroom and kitchen. I mean, that needs to have that underlying foundation of interoperability. So it starts from those foundations. That was really not only a lesson from Estonia, but from any successful country in the world who's been doing digital well. And I guess the other element that I found very different, and I guess it has to do with the privacy, Sally, what you asked, and with the choice and all of that. When you go to MyGov site and when you want to link a service, then it's a bit of an effort.
Yeah, it's not straightforward. And I guess for me, the effort was also because I'm like a newcomer to Australia when it comes to MyGov. So I don't have a tax history and I don't have a superannuation, all of that. So every time I actually ended up calling a call center to get the linking code. And I'm a digital enthusiast. I love doing it. And I love linking things. And what I really missed was like link all services. And almost, so it's, and at some point, I think I was talking to ATO or whoever, Medicare or somebody. And I said, I don't understand. I log on with my digital ID and I've inserted a lot of information for that to have digital ID. My name, my passport, my, whatever you have. And then I'm already there. I'm sort of half identified, or I'm identified to a very good level. They know my passport, my visa number, my, whatever I've inserted. Driver's license, all of
And
it.
then when I link, I start all over. My name, my date of birth. And I understand there's something is missing in the interoperability. because I think on that call, I said, so why don't you trust the digital ID as me? Why do you have to ask me again? And then the person, I hope it was not recorded, but no. We have to do our own. So it almost makes you think, why do I even bother to go from MyGov and digital ID? And then doing it all over again.
It's not quite the same circumstance, but it reminded me of it then, which was, so I've got two passports, a UK one and an Aussie one. And I left my UK passport at an Airbnb, and she dropped it off. She was coming up to, it was down the coast. She dropped it off at Paddington Police Station. So they have my UK passport. And I went in there to collect it, and they go, "Have you got any ID?" And I'm like, "You've
look at the picture.
Literally got my." And he's like, "Don't even start. I know how ridiculous it is, but I can't give you this unless you show me ID." And I'm like, "Can I borrow that for 2 seconds?" Flick it around. But then in the end, the policeman he took a picture of my passport on his phone. He took a picture of my digital New South Wales driving license.
Oh my God.
To be able to give me my passport back.
But I think the example that you use, Kersti, I mean, this is one federal government agency interacting with another federal government agency, let alone layering in different states and territories, local government, and then private sector.
Yes, the right arm
on top
talking
of
to the
that,
right arm.
right? Like it's just, it's, I mean, I think Australia seems to be building the bus and driving the bus at the same time.
Well, that's what I said. I mean, you need foundation first. And I guess, the kitchen works well. So ATO works well. The bathroom works well. Medicare works well. But I mean, and somewhere out there's digital ID that we have all created because it's great. And at some point we create that with private providers as well. But then again, whenever I link a service, and I can imagine so many Australians would give up at that point.
Yeah, I agree.
You're not the most patient nation, I've learned. So I would imagine they say, why would I link it? What's the point? So I would almost be interested in the stats. I mean, okay, we have so many, MyGov accounts. I mean, we have many. How many services are actually linked?
Yeah.
And how many of those services were linked through self-service? And how many had to actually make a phone call? Again, that phone call costs money. And I don't like when I'm identified myself with digital identity that has all my name, date of birth, what have you. Why do I have to type again? KERSTI, dun. So it's, and I think this is just a use case. I mean, this has nothing to do with me being Estonian, but it's just, and I'm sure so many people have the same issues. And the time and the money you could save by something to it quite simple, like if I link a service, they know, okay, we're taking everything from your digital identity. So we know this. So in order to make sure that you are you, because we need stronger than you provided, please provide additional information. What color is your Medicare card or whatever I didn't insert in the initial. But that kind of shows me that we are still working on kitchen and bathroom situation.
Right.
Or often it's referred as to working in silos. And that's going back to the start of our conversation. Interoperability is key.
I genuinely think, I'm not just saying this because we're on the private side, but I think the government have got a lot of complexity to deal with. And I think if you can build a digital ID solution outside of legislative identity, in a sense of for the sake of banking or accessing government systems, but for signing up for retail accounts or so on, and gain trust in low trust gain trust in places where it doesn't need low risk. There you go. Low risk environments. You can build that inertia, and then when government is finally ready to be able to plug in and it works, then we've got 10 million people who can just plug in and bang, it can be adopted more broadly.
I think another key to our success was really the public-private partnership, because even though our digital identity was totally government-led, it was built by private companies.
Yeah.
I mean, we never had a kind of unit in the government that did the actual thing. It was tendered, and of course, being a small country, it was, people coming together, working together, academia was there. So a true sense of collaboration that worked really well for us at the time, I think, because, again, being a young country, not having those, everybody was exciting to build this new country.
Mm.
And it wasn't like, oh, but if I kick that competition out, I can win that tender and then I can be the next, big thing. And everybody was working together. Somebody has asked me, actually, if we would have to introduce digital identity now or digital ID now, would we be successful? And we would have exactly the same issues like Australia and other countries have. So the times were different. But I think what Australia can learn, or other countries, is really when you get foundations right, then it's so much easier kind of to get everything else right. And like you were saying, the bus is driving and then at the same time you're building the bus.
Yeah.
So that is the challenge. I mean, there's legacy, there's states. It is probably possible, but it's so much harder than we had it like when we started with nothing. Digital ID bill, it's first bit of the puzzle. Interoperability is the second bit, and then get that private plug-in element into it. So that's going to be the sort of key, what makes it or breaks it for Australia. And one final thing on the making or breaking. When I first came here, and I started to talk like excited, oh, digital ID, this is great, this lifestyle. And everybody was like, no. We had Australian card. And then I was like, what's Australian card? I mean, why is everybody talking about it? And of course I looked into that and I realized but most of the people who are interested in using digital ID today, they were not even born when this happened.
It's a long time ago.
And it's almost used as an excuse not to do things.
Yeah,
it's almost saying like, let's not use mobiles because landlines were great. It's almost like shutting you down even while you could say, oh, we failed. That was, 30, 40 years ago. And now the world is moving on and we need to find how to make it safe and secure for the people and enjoyable to use. And I think that conversation has started in Australia.
I think that the narrative is so key around that. I think like Australians, they like to compete. Like we want to be better. And I think that the narrative of we want to build this to improve the country and do something better and be number one or whatever is a better narrative than kind of we're doing this because we probably should do.
And that's why trust exchange is great. It says Australia would be the first country in the world to do it.
Yeah.
So cool. Not 100% is factually
true.
100%
Don't let the truth get away in a good story.
But exactly what you were saying, I mean, that motivates Australians. Like we are doing something that is, best in the world. And I'm sure if it's done right and if the pilots are successful, many countries will look to Australia. Like many countries are looking to New South Wales on driving license. And, it's a story that Australia can tell. And that sometimes people ask me like, how do you feel in Estonia being, digitally advanced? And we are super proud.
Yeah.
So in that sense, we are very similar. We actually, even if it started as a bit of a, not like it wasn't planned to become the best country in the world in digital. Now that we are one of the best countries, we are so proud of it. I mean, tiny country, 1.3 million, somewhere in the middle of nowhere next to Russia. And we are proud. It has actually taken our national pride up, a bit.
That's the bit that will appeal to Australians, right? How do we be better? How do we be the best?
And Kersti, I mean, we've talked a lot about Estonia. I mean, you mentioned up front that there are a number of countries that are building or have built digital identity systems. You're a kind of sought after expert about digital identity and what's happening globally. What are some examples that you've seen from overseas, innovations or trends that might help shape the direction that Australia might take in
I think there's a lot to learn from several countries. I mean, in Europe, you can learn how different countries work together. And if you follow that discussion, you can see it's not easy. Even though we have single market, the digital single market is still a long way to go. And there are systems in Europe that are interconnected, but not every country is connected to another country when it comes to digital ID. So there's a challenge there. And many of the Nordic countries have followed the sort of banking system, that ID by banking. And it has its minuses and pluses. Singapore is an interesting one. We often feel we are very similar to Singapore when it comes to kind of thinking digitally, while they have chosen a different road to us. India is an interesting one. I mean, often people are saying like, can you do it in a big country? India has done it quite successfully in a big country. Of course, there are challenges there as well. So I think the key is to look for those different bits and pieces and really, like the last Olympics showed how great Australia can be. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what, we can be actually, even better, learning from those, what other people have done and the mistakes other people have done. We've done mistakes as well, but that's for another podcast. So it's, so I guess it's that taking and picking and traveling and talking and being open-minded and kind of wanting to take it to another level.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Kersti.
Thank you.
That was so cool. Like I was, I wanted to be kind of wrapping up and I'll go into another story. But when we caught up before, we were going to go for lunch and we perched on the edge of a desk and we chatted for about an hour and a half non-stop and missed lunch. But I feel like at the moment, there are a few people who really intrinsically understand it. And I hope the point of the whole podcast is to get more people to understand to a level. So I think hearing the stories around the success of digital ID in other countries really helps people to get their head around it. So really appreciate your time and
thank you for
coming
having
and talking to us. And
thank you for having me.
Well, I've learnt a lot today, Rob, after our conversation with Kersti. What was one of the things that you've learnt?
Interesting, isn't it? I think there was 3 things. First one is how they've been doing digital identity for 20 years and they can use it in so many different services. And it's a great example of someone who is doing it. The second piece is they had the advantage of putting it in from the beginning, where Australia has to retrofit it into our services. So that's a whole different challenge. It's not just a case of you can just do it. But the bit I love the most is the log. So whenever anyone uses your data or views you or queries your data in any way, you get a log. In the same way you've got your banking transactions or whatever. So you can theoretically query and question anyone who's looked at you. And I think that if we could see that today in Australia, it would completely change our mind on digital identity because I can now see it. I think that was the coolest thing.
I think the 3 things that I've learned is one is that digital identity is nothing to be scared about. And in fact, it is actually a tool that can transform the way that we live day to day. Like Kersti referred to it as a digital lifestyle. And that really when digital identity is working well and working right, you can use it from everything from interacting with government services and doing your tax to signing up for a gym membership and everything in between. And I think the third lesson for me is that the critical part for Australia right now, since we've had the Digital Identity Act passed, is actually getting that interoperability piece right. So making sure that the kitchen and the bathroom people are talking to each other and connecting out to the plumbing and the electricity. And that seems to me to be the most important thing for Australia to be focusing on now.
Yeah, and I think that this is completely agree. And I think that this is, if Australia missed the boat on digital identity, I think we get left behind as well.
Yeah.
So I think that as much as there's an opportunity now for Australia to be leading, there's also, if we don't do it, we're going to get ourselves in trouble.
And we won't do it again for then another 20 years, like the Australia card example, right? People still refer to that even though it was decades ago. So we really have to get it right.
An excellent episode. Thank you for Kersti to come in and spending some time with us. It was awesome.
Excellent. And make sure to subscribe for more episodes of Idiot Proof, where we continue to break down the world of digital identity.
Welcome to Idiot Proof, the podcast dedicated to digital ID.
In this series, you'll hear about everything from the recently passed Digital ID Bill through to some of the creative and abstract ways in which digital ID can be and is being used today.
I recently wanted to amend something on my will, and I thought, okay, when do I travel to Estonia? I need to book a time, la 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 la. And then I realized I can actually identify with digital identity and get that done, even though I'm in Australia. Life is just easy and more they're seamless services.
As a podcast, we want to bridge the gap from what the F is digital ID
through to that sounds great, get me one of those.
With digital ID, you obviously do an initial verification of your core documents, and then that ability to reuse that over and over. My biggest bugbear is trying to drag the birth certificate. Every time I have to do that, I'm just like, oh, God, that's a pain. Plus, who's getting it?
Your hosts are the lovely Sally McKenzie and myself, Rob Hotchin.
And I think one of the good things about the digital ID is that it really prioritises choice. You'll start to see innovation.
Sometimes feel like I've got a car and I'm selling to someone with a horse. And I think that people don't always realise there is a better solution.
We hope you enjoy listening and maybe even learn a thing or two. I know I will.